Hi class, welcome to this chapter on how to locate support materials for your speeches, I should say, and how you could use this information for your class. You have two major speeches, your informative speech and your persuasive speech. And for each speech, you are required to verbally cite sources, research sources, and also you need to list your work cited in your outlines at the end of your outlines regarding the research that you conducted for each of your speeches. So again, two major speeches, your informative and your persuasive speech, and for each speech you need to verbally cite your sources along with listing it in a works cited area of your outline. So how do you find sources? Now I know many of you have already done this for your English classes, for other classes, you know how to conduct research, but let's see how you can do this for your speech. In this particular chapter, and I'm sure you have read this chapter, you're looking at what types of sources you could use in your speech, how to determine, what sources are good, what sources are not so good, what are we looking for in your particular speech, in this particular class as far as sources are concerned, and how do you orally, verbally cite your sources. Very, very important because this is a big part of the grading process as well. So let's look at this PowerPoint on the chapter. What types of materials can you use in your speech? Now I do want to mention in the nav bar of your class, that red bar that goes across the top of your home page, there is a section called Lib, L-I-B, Guide. This is a quick and easy way for you to get to our library sources. It goes over how to cite MLA sources, what's a good source, how do you know if an internet source is good. So this will give you a quick overview. Now guys, you don't have to use the LibGuide to do your research, but why not? It's just a quick and easy way to get into ProQuest, EBSCOhost, other areas that will quickly link you to good research material. Okay, so what type of support materials are we looking for? Now remember, we have our introduction, we have our body, we have our conclusion. So in the body, which is the meat of your speech, is where you're looking for some good information to support your goal, whether it's your informative goal or your persuasive goal, whatever you're informing us of or persuading us of, you want to really have a nice mixture of information in there. So, you could bring in facts about people, places, events, dates, times. Again, it depends on the type of speech you are delivering. If you were, delivering a biography, the life and times of Bob Dylan, obviously there's going to be a lot of factual information about where he was born, his musical career, people that influenced him. So it just depends on your speech, but it's important to have good facts and to back it up, to verbally cite where this information comes from. Definitions, brief definitions, always think about to whom am I speaking to or to whom you're speaking to. And you know what, if there's a word or a concept, hey, I don't think everybody's going to know what this means. You need to define it. And I'm not talking about Webster's Dictionary. I'm talking about layman's terms. Put it in terms that your audience can understand. Define it, okay? Think about how you define different concepts if needed in your speech. Examples are wonderful, and you always want to have examples to kind of define information. They could be brief, for example, this is how this will happen, or it could be extended, as far as a lengthy example where you kind of bring people to a place and time. Or it could be hypothetical. It's not necessarily true, but you say, well, let's say if this would happen. And this would help your audience to understand what concept you are trying to communicate. And also along with examples, you could have illustrations. And illustrations is like a mental drawing for your audience. So you're really describing the series of events that take place, and you use that as an example. Statistical information. Okay, let me say right now, if you provide any stats in your speech, you need to cite them. You need to tell us where these numbers, this information has come from. Never let a statistical informational item go without being cited. Don't use too many stats in a speech. An 8-minute speech, maybe 2 at the most, because you know what? The numbers, if you're just downloading data to folks, it's not going to work. So consider when you're using stats, make sure that you have them backed up. You could look at whether they're descriptive or not, but they do work, right? They really kind of bring the information home in a concrete way if it really is substantial statistical information. Going back to this slide too, graphs work wonderfully. For your informative speech, you need to use PowerPoint. You need to bring in a visual aid. So yeah, this really will make a difference in your speech if you use a PowerPoint. And if you are providing stats, use a graph or a pie graph that will help us to understand, to make it clear. Again, always put yourself in the shoes of your audience and say, you know what, will I understand this as I'm presenting this? If I was sitting in the audience, what's a better way? What kind of visual can I bring in? What kind of words can I use? How can I condense this? How can I edit this so that it works? Okay, how do you determine what type of sources and support materials to use? Okay, we love stories. Since you were 2 years old, I'm sure you have always said, tell me another story. Oh, when we go out on Friday night with our friends, we love to hear stories. We love to hear candor. So why not in a speech? Now, again, your speeches are not personal narratives, but if you could back it up with, some of your personal knowledge, with a story, a narrative, an anecdotal type of situation, do it, because this is what's going to connect you with your audience. So consider your personal knowledge. Remember, I ask you to choose a topic that you are connected with. So you should have some kind of small story to add to your particular speech, which will add to the body of your talk. Primary and secondary sources, for instance, a lot of times we do our research online, and primary sources are the source. It's the source that comes from the original document. Secondary is cited within that primary source. A lot of times, if you're finding secondary source, it's asked that you go back to the primary source and cite that, because that way you know that it's verified and it's credible. So consider that when you are using or looking for your research. Scholarly or popular sources. Okay, so if you're kind of getting a glaze over your eyes right now listening to this video, listen now. Okay, you need at least 3 sources, okay, and they need to be researched sources. So that's a scholarly source right here. I'm not saying you can't bring in popular sources, because that adds flavor, adds spice, but don't have all your research be popular or from popular sources. Scholar sources are written for experts in their field. Okay, scholar sources is a journal, the American Medical Journal, or any organization or person that has conducted research, gathered all that data, and then submitted that as a scholarly article or source. Popular sources are written for general readers. They're pretty interesting, articles and information, but it's not necessarily researched and strongly, documented. So again, be sure that you are using scholarly sources. And when you go into ProQuest or EBSCOhost, just choose scholarly articles. You could just check that off, and that's all in your LibGuide on how to do that. And you'll find scholarly articles for your speech. What do you evaluate for your sources? Obviously, they have to be accurate. They need to be verified. They have to remain in original context. We know that when something is said out of context, it could have a totally different meaning. So, A lot of times we like to use the internet, we like to use websites, but you know what? Is it accurate? Does it come from a credible source? Okay, whatever source it is that you are using, let's say you are using a written type of research, make sure it's a credible source. Make sure it's verified, and make sure all your sources are accurate and verified. Make sure it's complete. Again, I always like to use the example that if you use just a portion of research, for instance, let's say we're looking at capital punishment, and we were saying, my speech is that capital punishment should be incorporated in every state of the United States. So I go out and I do my research, and I find that 2 states out of all our United States that has capital punishment, there's a lower crime rate. So I decide to state in my speech that states with capital punishment have lower crime rate. And that's not complete. That's not providing the whole picture. That is, in a sense, taking the information out of context, and it's not necessarily truthful information, ethical information. You have a lot of power as a speaker, so you want to be sure that you provide good ethics. So make sure everything is complete. You don't kind of use whatever research you find, if it's minimum, to show a whole picture that supports your goal. Make sure it's current. Web is famous for not having current information. Again, if you're doing a historical speech, you're providing a historical speech, things that have happened in history. I teach at the Gettysburg campus, and Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There is no updating that information. So, but if you're delivering a speech on technology, that has to be very current. So breaking news is better, and you're going to state that in your speech when it was published, because we're going to make that determination as a listener in your audience whether or not it is credible. Make sure it's trustworthy, it's from unbiased sources. Hold your sources to the highest standards. Again, this goes back to your ethics as a speaker, and that you are providing good, strong sources. We know our friend Aristotle. We know that a good persuasive rhetoric includes pathos, ethos, and logos. And your credibility, your ethos is really at stake when you don't use good, credible sources. How do you support your sources? Now, we say here from your chapter that you quote when the material is long, you paraphrase when it's wordy or unclear or awkward content. But the key here, and again, if I lost you, come back now. The key here is that you verbally cite your sources. And what do we want to hear as your verbally cited sources, this research? We want to hear the name of the publication, okay? The title of the article, if that applies, okay? And the date in which it was published. Or, in a sense, for a website, when you obtain that information if you can't find that published information. So again, when you're verbally citing your sources in your speeches, your informative and your persuasive speeches, very important, because this class, you need to be able to present an informative speech and a persuasive speech and cite academic sources. This is just part of the process of your academic career ladder, that you know how to do this. So you cite your sources by telling us the publication, the title of the article if it applies, and the date in which it was published. That way we know it's current, right? Use your materials in a different way. Okay, the important part here is that you are just not downloading data to us, or you're not just feeding us facts, or you're not just giving us expert opinions in your speech. That's boring. You need to provide it in many different ways. Directly, as you see here, direct information. You can compare and contrast, or provide an analogy. Okay, so comparing, you could say, getting A's in college is like getting high marks excellent marks as an employee at an employer's at the local employer or at the local bank. So you're comparing. Contrast is showing the difference. Getting A's in college, on the other hand, is as if you were failing as an employee and always calling in sick and not coming to work and following through. An analogy works really well in speaking. An analogy, as we know, is you're comparing that information so that your audience can understand it. Like an analogy would say, for instance, let's say I was delivering a narrative, and I was telling you I went for a walk one day, and I was walking. Well, I don't want to use that analogy because I have a broad audience here. A lot of times, I'll give you another good analogy here. For instance, when the tsunami hit Asia, and they were saying it covered a huge, grand area of land, and many reporters were saying that the tsunami hit, and it hit a lot of land, a huge area, and it was kind of like, well, what's a huge area of land? Well, one reporter who was very smart decided to put up a picture of the United States and said the tsunami hit, and it covered the area as if the size of the United States. Okay, now we know this. As an analogy, we know that this is the size in which the tsunami hit. Okay, so just be aware of and use analogies. It's a comparison where your audience can understand the information because they can relate to it. How do you cite your sources? And I mentioned this earlier in this particular PowerPoint, that you will have your sources cited two ways. One, at the end of your outline, and I will also be asking you to do a research assignment where you're providing information about a summary of your sources and how you would verbally cite it and the credibility. But don't worry about that. That's a different assignment. For your outline, we have your cited sources at the end, and then you verbally cite them in your speech. Remember the name of the publication, the article if it applies, and when it was published. Okay. And last but not least, just some things to keep in mind with your oral citations. Use variety. I do ask that you use two different mediums. Again, two different mediums. So I don't want everything from a scholarly journal, or I don't want all books. I want a mixture. Maybe one good credible website and two articles, or a book, an article, and a website. I just need two different mediums that you will present in your speech. Be sure that you're enthusiastic about your sources. Remember, you want to write out on your note cards. Remember, you're using note cards. And if you want to be clear, according to the May 2015 issue of Time magazine on illiteracy and children, 9 out of 10 children who, and then you can continue to cite that source. But practice saying that, or write that down so that it's very clear and it's accurate. Okay, well, that ends our PowerPoint on locating material, locating support material. Some things to keep in mind, guys. Okay, a couple key areas. In conclusion, in a nutshell here, you will orally, verbally cite sources, and be sure that you clearly cite them with the name of the publication, the article, and the date. You will cite them at the end of your outline. Be sure that you have a variety of information in your speech. Okay, that makes it an engaging speech, delivery, presentation. Follow the concepts that I just went over in this PowerPoint, but also, the best thing you can do is record your speech in the practice area, listen to yourself from an audience point of view, and decide what you would edit, what you would change. Okay, until our next video, I'll see you later, and have a great day.